Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Share Your Why podcast. I have a very good friend of mine, Sean Maroni, with me today. Sean, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Really glad to have you here. Sean and I met through a project that I was working on at NC State where we were actually doing a profile on his story. Here's a quick bio on Sean. He's the founder of Betabox Learning, a company based in Raleigh, North Carolina. They're working to replace lecture-based instruction with guided hands-on learning in schools. Sean studied mechanical engineering at NC State and is a member of the Forbes 30 Under 30 class of 2018 for education. Most of our conversation today, we want to focus around customer discovery, trying to learn about how do you take something that you're really passionate about and go out and find out, hey, is there really a need for this thing? Kicking it off, we'd love to just hear more about your story, what you're motivated by, and how you got to where you are now.
In terms of the story, when I was a kid, I was always building things in my garage. I was also trying to sell the things I was making. There's a strange story in middle school where I grew up in Northern Virginia. There's these cicadas that come out every 13 years or something. I would convince little kids in my neighborhood to collect them and dead ones and bring them to my front door. And then I would hot glue the wings to buttons and sell them as Christmas ornaments. That was one of my bizarre early entrepreneurial adventures. I didn't know that it was called entrepreneurship, but then I came to NC State and just continued to get more connected with the entrepreneurial community. And all of that is kind of where Betabox came from. Through NC State, I had an opportunity to study design at the Stanford D School for a little bit. And that's where I met some individuals that were interested in maker spaces. There was one that I was working with called The Garage at NC State. This collaboration basically to help other universities make maker spaces with these two other guys that I met through a college opportunity led to Betabox ultimately.
I love it. Thank you for sharing, man. How did your why kind of factor into that story? Like, what purpose did you find along the way that motivated you to start Betabox and work on everything you're working on now?
There was this difference between my experience in school and my experience on my own when I was learning and discovering projects. So I was really interested in model rocketry when I was a kid and got into some pretty sophisticated mathematical principles. I sort of entered some national competitions, kind of led with my curiosity and my interest. And my parents just got out of the way. Basically, they were like, hey, do it. And they would help me, buy a thing here or there that I needed. So I was learning a lot. It wasn't necessarily measurable in school per se. When it came into college, what I noticed in my own pursuit of mechanical engineering and a STEM degree is some of the bad habits that I relied on to get through high school started to catch up with me. And what I mean by that is there's a point in a lot of people's educational career, especially in the STEM fields, where they go from building internal mental models of a concept and really understanding an equation, how it works and how it can function. They start to lose that tree of knowledge and they're not really building new knowledge on top of old knowledge in a way that's really connected. You shift away from that at some point, given the stresses of standardized testing and to more memorization. Okay, I have memorized the Pythagorean theorem, but I don't really know where it came from. That can get you through Calc 1, 2, but if you continue to pursue that memorization path, it becomes more and more difficult to really see the bigger picture of something like mathematics, and it can ultimately lead you to fall behind in the more advanced areas. I just noticed that at a research institution like NC State, it can be difficult to do a lot of that hard sort of internal work through the standard lecture format and I love NC State, but there's a lot of professors that are mostly there for research. If you really need some extra help to really get those internal concepts solid in your mind and so you can build upon those as knowledge, it can be a challenge if teaching is not the main priority of certain professors. So I struggled with that in school but I did pick up a lot of engineering concepts. And one of those was just a love for efficiency and wanting things to be better and more optimized. I started to turn that attention to the system of learning itself and this very inefficient lecture-based format for teaching, right? You've got this highly paid professor that has a big opportunity cost of teaching a lot of times because the research is really what attracts income for the university and prestige and everything else. And then you've got all these students that are being bussed into this location. It irked me a little bit. And, I'm not the first person to cast such a dispersion on the education system. That's kind of where some of the passion came from. It's this just seems really inefficient. And I didn't learn that way. And I feel like a lot of other people don't learn this way. And maybe it would be cool to try to do something about that.
I've never heard it articulated quite that way. For you to put it in terms of inefficiency, I love what you said about having the baseline. You have to have the baseline so you can build upon it, build upon it, build upon it, rather than being rushed and just trying to learn different things in a silo.
It was compound interest. Elon Musk was the example of where this comes from. And he thinks about not, okay, what have people done before and how can I do that slightly differently or better? But it's what is the raw cost? That's that first principles thinking, but you can't really get there if you're just relying on memorization or just sort of close copying of other folks. And to be clear, I never finished that degree actually, and I still haven't today. I got the foundational concepts down at least the first couple of years. Those are some of the most important things. There's a guy, Charlie Munger, who talks a lot about Warren Buffett's less famous counterpart. he talks all about mental models, knowing like 80% of a lot of different fields. He doesn't necessarily have a PhD in anything, but what his success always was like weaving them together in like novel ways. So that kind of thinking is not achievable if you're just going on memorization alone.
I'll definitely check that out. I appreciate it. How did you translate that into a company with Betabox?
The way I think of it, and then how it kind of formulated Betabox's early days, I think of customer discovery as something that happens before you really have a minimum viable product, the most basic version of what you're trying to achieve. What customer discovery looked like, it was talking to a lot of different people. And then we had this weird thing called a Betabox, which was like a mobile makerspace, basically. We had a market pivot first. We were initially trying to sell it to higher education. It just wasn't a super exciting roadmap. So then it was about, let's change our market. And we were getting a lot of feedback from people saying like, hey, this is cool, but this could really be useful in K-12 schools. And so we were hearing from like teachers and principals, admins, go towards the enthusiasm. So we changed our market to K-12, and then it was about a product pivot. So the product pivot came from watching how people were interacting with the proposed business model that we had. So we were going to be like a mobile classroom business where we were renting out facilities that were going to be on a school's location for a period of time, like a few months. So, we charge per month. We would give maybe some initial training on how to operate this facility, and then we would be gone, right? And we would just focus on the manufacturing of the boxes and then, dropping them off. Nobody knew what to do with it. It was like, we'll drop it off and amazing things will emerge. And it just was wishful thinking. What people did notice or want was they wanted us to come out with the box. Our first paid customer for what has now been termed the on-site field trip business, which is when we use our boxes plus our staff members to provide a short-term 1 or 3 day experience, was a parent that found out about us through some article. And she literally emailed me and like demanded that I meet with her to bring this on-site field trip concept to her son's private school. So she came to HP Raleigh, where I was working at the time, and she paid for it out of pocket for our product. It was like $2,000 for a parent, like nothing to gain from this, to come to this school and do this on-site field trip makerspace experience. If somebody is like yelling at you to bring your products to their location, you should listen to them. Right. The opposite of that is indifference. If people they're not really engaging with it, or they're saying it's nice to make you feel good, that's the worst. And it's important as a founder to cut through that, especially amongst your friends, if you see that happening. And that's what started us offering the on-site field trip business model, where we charge sort of per day. So we charge a lot more per day than renting it out, but there's a lot higher cost of goods sold too. We're humans are driving to a location to provide this experience. It's more of a service versus more of a rental thing. But there was another pivot that we had to do, which was like a business model. We started to find a little bit of a mismatch between who could pay for the product and who we sort of wanted to pay for the product. Who could pay for the product was rich private schools. They could get this stuff anyway. They could do a fundraising campaign. They could raise $100K. They could make a cool makerspace. There was this other segment of the market, low income and Title I schools with high percentages of free and reduced lunch, that really could actually benefit. And we could create a lot of impact with our product, because they weren't set up to fund an on-site makerspace. That's also kind of where our heart was with the impact piece, is thinking about, well, how can we go somewhere where we can really make a difference, shift the trajectory of a kid's education, right? Like if a kid sees a 3D printer and just the light bulb goes off, kind of like to moments that I had as a kid with model rocketry. And what we realized is, one, we actually had an adjacent customer industry that we could actually collaborate with and generate contracts with industry partners to bring these on-site field trips to lower income K-12 schools. And so we offered a means of industry engaging with us through mostly marketing, putting their branding on the lab and things of that nature, custom experiences that are relevant to their industry. So we were able to do some contracts with industry. And then the other piece was like a pricing change. We thought initially, like, how do you make $1 million, right? Well, you can sell $1,000 thing to like 1,000 people or whatever, or you can sell $1 million thing one time. It's the same outcome. You made $1 million. We sort of shifted our model from being about marketing and trying to get teachers to get us to be funded by schools and some direct sales, to more of a complex sale where we would sell like a $500K deal to a whole state or a whole school system, and just do a couple of those a year to build the business. And so we were able to kind of make that shift in like 2017-ish. And then that kind of made the business work from a cash flow standpoint. So three initial pivots got us to like a viable business. And what ultimately is Betabox, or what does a Betabox actually look like? So it's like a 20-foot shipping container, at least that's how we started, where it's filled with 3D printers, laser cutters, VR headsets. Kids walk up and then we're walking them through something. So a great example is like our self-driving cars experience, where they walk up, they see self-driving car parts being 3D printed and laser cut. They move to a station where they're wiring a self-driving car together, a little robot car basically. They're moving to a third station where they're doing computer science. Then they can drive the car around manually. And then at the end, we bring all the kids outside and they're like racing the cars with algorithms. And then they can see like whose car performs the best, basically. So that's like one example of a few of the different experiences that we offer within this sort of like magical makerspace in a box that we're bringing out to schools.
That must be so special for you to be able to just see like the light bulbs that must come on in kids' eyes when they're doing some of those things, right?
It's awesome. It's like why you do it. There's the nerds out there that they're super excited and highly visible and they like want to answer every question that we say and they're like wanting to get, but those kids are going to be fine in terms of this stuff. Like they've probably got a support system. They've probably got a dad that was an engineer or something, and they're probably going to get resources. But the coolest thing is when you've got a kid who's like skeptical of it, right? Or maybe he's even making jokes. In certain schools, there's a mentality where it's like, you don't want to be earnest. You don't want to show interest in certain things. It's not cool necessarily to get engaged in something, right? So Betabox is a little different. It kind of feels like recess a little bit. Typically, it's younger folks that are out there with the Betabox, and we can get those kids that are kind of skeptical, standoffish to open up a little bit, try some things, try to drive the car around and stuff. And then by the end, you've got them like excited and asking questions. And then sometimes at the end, we'll say like, hey, what's the starting salary for a self-driving car engineer? They'll think it's like $10 an hour. And then we'll say, how about $80,000 a year? And sometimes their mind just explodes. And then they make the connection of, hey, this was fun. It wasn't that intimidating. Like you can actually make money doing this. For a lot of kids, that is an important light bulb. And our hope is, and that's really the purpose of the on-site field trip service, it's just like a small percentage of the kids that go through this experience. You get that little trajectory shift, which potentially leads them to being a little bit more engaged. We want that powerful thing to basically be activated in kids so they can see in their environment opportunities that they might not otherwise see. So the STEM summer camp, right? That before they would have not even, their mind wouldn't have even picked it up. But then they're like, oh, that's kind of like Betabox. Hey, mom, maybe I could do that, right? So that's kind of what we're all about.
And I can tell from your whole journey that you're relentless in your pursuit of figuring out how the heck do I make this thing financially viable so that we can go do this for them.
One of the reasons I wanted to go the for-profit direction is, hey, let's make something sustainable, right? So this can be a thing that's impactful for like years to come, and hopefully like a mechanism for equality of opportunity, right? The hope is like 20 years from now, there's going to be some Nobel Prize winner that like I'm like old and crusty, you know, and there's going to be like some person that like cured cancer or whatever it is. I got my start with this weird box that came to my school, and that would be like, all right, I can like rest easy now.
I know you had asked me about, how would I define customer discovery and customer validation? I know I'm just barely diving into this topic, so I want to learn more about it for sure. But a lot of the work that I've done at NC State with some of my entrepreneurship classes has been focused around like generating as many ideas as possible of potential ways you could provide value, and then going out and validating that. You ask them, some general questions, but then you're like, hey, I'm going to bring this to you tomorrow. Are you willing to go ahead and sign the deal with me tomorrow if I bring it to you? Even though, you don't really have it. But where exactly do you see that transition from discovery to validation? And do you ever see yourself circling back to discovery?
There's like all sorts of different entrepreneurial models out there. And ultimately, I think that you kind of have to assimilate the models that you learn about in school and just online or wherever else with your own sort of personality and psyche and kind of like founder mentality. The way I would say is you got your customer discovery, pre-product, you're asking questions, you're doing customer interviews, collecting that kind of information. Then you've got an MVP. Then you shift into customer validation, where it's more of that, hey, we're going to sell this thing. Product market fit is at the end of customer discovery. The best definition I like for that is this gentleman named Raul, who developed Superhuman, has a great one. It's amazing. It's super data driven. It's when you ask all of your customers, if you had no longer had access to this product, would you be indifferent, like or somewhat disappointed, or very disappointed? Once you have 40% of your users say very disappointed, you have product market fit. Like the standard customer discovery to validation approach felt a little bit like hindsight, or kind of putting a narrative on what is fundamentally extremely chaotic art form. There's some randomness injected into the way these startups really figure out what the heck they are. So I kind of think of it a little differently. I think of it as like imagine is like the first step. And I do think it's important for founders to have a point of view, or at least a problem space or a passion, or have something you're excited about, and then overpromise the heck out of something. So that's kind of what you were talking about. It's like, hey, could I bring this tomorrow? Edison is like actually pretty famous for this as somebody who's overpromising to the press. He would say, hey, I've already invented this thing. He hasn't started. And it would force him to sit down and do the work. And if you can overpromise, yeah, let's talk next week. I'll have that demo to show you. That's when you go sit and stay up all night and slave away and make that thing happen. If you're a founder with integrity, you won't want to let that person down. And therefore, you will be internally motivated to execute, like make your words match the reality. And it's okay to not follow the script exactly when you're building a startup. Some companies are like many startups in one. Epic Games is a great example of that. The local North Carolina, they bootstrapped for like 22 years. That was like 4 different startups, 4 different customer discoveries to validations in like one company. So also don't make the mistake that there's only one customer discovery phase of a company. It can very possibly happen many times. We're kind of going through that right now, where what we realized is our on-site field trip business is cool. The step has always been, is there a way for us to take a jump to something even more impactful for our customers? The question was, hey, this was cool, but what can you guys do for us once the box leaves? And it's easy to engage a kid when you have a freaking 3D printer. But when I got to teach a Pythagorean theorem to an 8th grader with a textbook, what do you have for me? That's kind of what has opened up this new phase of customer discovery and validation for Betabox, which is moving beyond just the physical box itself and trying to offer more support services for those teachers. There's a lot of teachers that want to implement hands-on learning. It's not necessarily that there's a lack of will, usually like a lack of a way, where the gap between the standards and the resources is huge. The thinking is, could we just be a way to be like the sous chef for the teacher for hands-on learning, where everything the teacher needs to get leverage on their time in the classroom. That's what we're doing now with K-12 projects, so hands-on learning equipment, so that we ship those out to the schools. We have something called My Betabox, which is a web portal where students get really high quality like videos and learning content. And then we have professional development for teachers to help implement all of this. That's like our new phase of customer discovery and validation, is figuring out what actually works for teachers. And we're not through it yet. So this is all very much prototyping. That's why this conversation and topic is really interesting to me. And we've been doing things like, paying teachers little $25 gift cards to talk to me on Zoom, actually talking to parents, admins, all sorts of different stakeholders to figure out like, how can we really make a concerted effort to not just have this cool on-site field trip thing, but actually truly like create an alternative for to the lecture. So a hands-on learning that's actually scalable is kind of the dream here. Do you have any thoughts on customer interviews or just ways to do that well?
I found that when you have 2 people, it's usually helpful because then one person can just focus on taking notes. One person can focus on doing the actual interview. There's some tools out there like otter.ai and a few other ones that will automatically do notes for you and let you tag things and things like that. The biggest thing I've learned from people who've been kind of teaching me along the way is to not lead people on.
I think it can be tough just to navigate feedback that's like really different from where you're trying to go. Can be definitely hard. There's like this quote, like, suffering is seeing the world as it truly is for the first time. It's so tempting to just be like, no, don't you think this other thing that I want you to think?
Something I've struggled with a lot, I don't know if you struggle with the same thing, is like being like more analytical, like we're just like constantly looking for the solution. And so my mind, as soon as I have like even the slightest inkling of a problem, I'm like straight all the way to like, oh wow, here's what it could look like in 5 years after I built out the entire thing and there's a million people using it. What strategies have you found to deal with that? Do you try and kind of suppress that a little bit, or do you don't want to have a solution in search of a problem, right?
Yeah, I think that being okay with it just totally not being the thing that ultimately happens. The only reason we were ever able to generate any sustainable business that could fund salaries is a difficult, messy saga of letting go of my desire to do something super highly scalable that people didn't want. Like, it was a process, let's say, a little bit of ego popping up, a little bit of denial popping up, of just ultimately the only way it was going to work was I had to let go of some of that stuff and just focus on like, hey, we have a solid small business. It makes money. People like it. It has impact. And I am actually really passionate about it. Kind of letting some of those onion layers of like perceived what I want maybe to achieve versus just like, hey, this is what we have. Let's do amazing at it. Now I feel like every time I get a harebrained idea of like, here's how we could do something in a high scale way, it's okay if that doesn't work out, versus in the past, it was more about, okay, this has to be like the way that it is. Startups are not measured in time, but it's iterations. So the number of iterations that you work through is what determines the amount of time between where you are today and the ultimate market fit. Some startups never get there. Some startups take 10 years. The key metric is like, how fast are you like letting go of what you are today, so that you are creating the opportunity to become the next version. The faster you kind of work through whatever emotional crap you have to work through to realize that you might have a point of view, but your solutions ideas probably aren't the right fit. You really just have to focus on how can I be quick with my development cycles. It really is like speed is really the essence of what you need to figure out to work through those iterations. Can we ship something every week? Can we talk to this many people in this amount of time? I mean, getting those iteration cycles to accelerate. Once you do that, I do think you get less emotional and attached.
Yeah, I think attachment and ego are really good things you brought up there because as entrepreneurs, we fundamentally are taking total ownership in what we're creating and putting out into the world. And in some ways, it is us, or at least a reflection of us. I think definitely like staying focused around your why. That's why personally for me, like I'm so passionate about the idea of like the why being the center of it. Like in your case, right? Like the why is, impacting especially students and helping them to, have that light bulb moment, right? And it impact their future trajectory. As you found, that's something that can happen on a smaller scale or on a larger scale. And either way, you can gain that personal fulfillment from it because it's stemming from your why. Rather than I feel like a very traditional route would be like, oh, I have to like build this, like you said, like $1 billion business. And like that's what I'm motivated by. And you're really limiting yourself to success of like, wow, this one thing really has to work out.
Well, and that's like the asymmetry in the startup world between the investment community and the founder community. So you've got all your eggs in one basket as a founder. The thing with the investment community, you fundamentally have diversification across potential experiments, right? Because you can deploy your capital across many different ideas. So when you're so in the weeds on your business, it can be easy to forget how cool it is. Fear of not fulfilling your potential or whatever. Like you know, as founders, we have our egos. We think we're super. We think we're going to be the next whoever. And ultimately, you need to be okay with, hey, if it all ended right now, like, am I doing something that's cool? Vulnerability, a lot of it gets summed up with is like, if you have a passion on something, you are putting yourself out there in the same way that a creative person would do with a design or a piece of artwork or music, anything, right? It's similar in that sense.
For a lot of people listening who aren't even entrepreneurs, aren't even in the space, I mean, it applies everywhere because it's just this idea of making as many mistakes as quickly as possible, whether you're trying to find a career or find a job, just something you want to do in life or a passion project. I think a big theme of what you're talking about is enjoying the journey. I'm sure you didn't think that like, oh, I was going to go 8 more years or whatever of all these different pivots. But if you had been in the mindset of, I'm only doing this because one day it's going to be this big thing, then I'm sure it would have been a miserable experience to have to go through like 4 different pivots.
Right? Entrepreneurship is all just hands-on learning. So if you're not willing to look dumb in front of the people that you respect, mentors, or like asking the dumb questions, I ask a lot of dumb questions to our accounting team, and I've learned a lot because of that. You got to be able to do that kind of stuff. That speeds up your own learning cycles. As a founder, you want to have the answer, right? You're giving the pitch, and the investor asks the question in the Q&A period. You want to have like a smooth, elegant answer. Just say you don't freaking know. Sometimes it's okay. I don't know. Like, what do you think? Let's talk about it. Then it opens a conversation with that investor. They know you probably don't know. They probably don't even know. They just came up with something to sound smart. I'm giving myself advice as much as I am anybody else because it's a hard thing to remember in the moment.
Like, what are some tips and tricks you've gained along the way? I'm sure through a lot of mistakes.
We've been toying with how do we get parents in onto the process. There's a lot of research around how important the home is and some of the stuff that we're dealing with. Thinking about how do we engage parents has been a topic. I actually screen shared like our current website iteration at that time, and we actually kind of just walked through the website together. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? That was really helpful for positioning. I learned from that we were not servicing price. They couldn't see the price for a long time on the page, and that actually corroded trust. The important thing I would always say at the beginning of that interview is like pay special care at the beginning to let them know that you want the real honest feedback because you're just wasting your time otherwise. One last piece on that is it's important to filter out who's a good fit and a bad fit. And it's not just your product and making your product work a certain way. It's also figuring out which customers are the right customers for your product, of course. So there's going to be some folks, whether that's an income bracket or it's a geography, you're going to find natural patterns amongst the people that are initially attracted to speak with you. Just make sure you collect that data along the way. But you can figure out ways to scale, systematize this in a way that allows you to do as many of them as possible. You're going to be mapping the territory of what your customers' brains are through all of these conversations. You're going to be able to develop a model of what people think, and you'll be able to hear little nuances in their voice maybe. So there's the data level of what they're actually saying. And then there's the inference layer that you can apply, not speaking for them, but it's thinking about based on an open-ended question, where do they go with it? And then maybe you can have inference to do a follow-up question or a product feature. So you're kind of building this mental map, which is really a valuable takeaway. And then you as a founder will be able to apply in every conversation that you have, like internally in a development meeting or in a sales meeting. Those would be some, I guess, thoughts.
These are fantastic. Did you start to share with them like, hey, here's kind of the idea, what we're trying to do, the value we're going to bring, or was it just straight into questions?
Me, I probably skewed a little more towards having something a bit more fully baked in, our own journey. We pretty much had something that we thought was good. The facility has always been a piece of it. That's what we had to start with. But really, that's not the product. That's just something that enables, that's like your servers on your computer for us, like the makerspace itself. Really, the product that got changed a lot was like what experiences that we're offering, the fact that we should offer experiences versus just the product. So we had the thing, we had the box to drop off on campuses. Like people aren't good with a blank canvas. So if you just tell them like, what do you think would be good to like solve these problems? I mean, you can definitely do that, and they'll maybe have some ideas that could be helpful. But I feel like it's kind of a dance between the entrepreneur and the customer to kind of co-invent something, but you have more of an obligation to come up with proposed inventions, at least, like the Henry Ford thing. They actually did say what their problem was. They said they wanted a faster horse, right? So faster is the word. He says that, hey, I want a faster horse, the adjective or whatever it would be. Dive in on that. It's just horse was the wrong solution. What is a horse? Well, it's a transportation mechanism. Could it be other things? So this is where your ideation can come in. So maybe a horse solves other problems for those people. In this particular example, I'm not sure if it does. Maybe a horse is like a status symbol. What are you paying for when you buy a horse? Maybe it's like 70% transportation, 30% status. That's where your follow-up questions can be. Then you can try to map solution values on top of like a new product innovation, but it all comes back to the core value of like the transportation. And then it would be about then showing your vehicle, hey, like what if you didn't buy a horse and you bought this instead? Then see what people would do.
If there was one word of advice you had for me or experience to share with me or with anybody else listening who has an idea or just wants to learn more about customer discovery, what would that word of advice be?
Do that inventory of your own psychology and figure out like what things in your brain are holding you back. And then you may also want to ask some people that know you well, because it's very easy to have blind spots about your own psychology. Is it you're not willing to be vulnerable in public? You're not willing to look dumb in public? You're too egotistical? You're too set on your initial set of solutions? Think about how could you work on those? Put yourself maybe out of your comfort zone. Figure out a way to address one of those things. And I feel like you'd be amazed how quickly certain opportunities in your startup unlock once you start changing some of those blind spots that you have.
I'll definitely take that advice. I hope everybody listening has a chance to as well. Sean, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. It was awesome to learn from you. Would love to just hear, where can people get a hold of you and what can they do to engage with Betabox or with everything you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. So thanks. This was awesome, Thomas. Appreciate it. In terms of getting engaged with Betabox, you're an engineer, instructional coach, teacher, just anybody that's interested in anything related to technology. We do a lot of contractor relationships for curriculum and content development. So that would be really cool. Feel free to reach out. If you have any questions, you can just email me. It's Sean@betaboxlearning.com. I'm in Raleigh. If you want to say hello there, happy to chat.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much, Sean. And for everybody tuning in, we'll see you again in another week or two for the next episode of the podcast.